Welcome to the channel. Tonight we step into a place where the air cuts like glass, sharp, thin, unforgiving. Snow drifts over the endless prairie, muffling the world until the only sounds left are the groan of old timber and the restless breath of something wild in the dark. This isn't the polished Wild West of movie reels. This is the raw edge of winter, where gold means nothing and survival means everything. Out here, the cold doesn't just bite, it hunts. Your eyelashes might freeze before you finish a blink, your heartbeat echoing against the frozen silence. Every step crunches too loud, every breath feels borrowed. And if you're not ready, you won't make it through the night. So before you settle in, take a moment, hit that like and subscribe. Only if you're ready to ride this storm with me. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights. You find yourself trudging through the bitter dark, snow swirling against your cheeks, the wind sneaking in wherever your scarf doesn't quite meet your collar. Imagine what it means to sleep here. No central heating, no thick glass windows, no hum of radiators, just you, the wilderness, and whatever you can cobble together to keep from freezing stiff. The first settlers who came westward often arrived with dreams in their heads, but very little insulation packed in their wagons. Many of them learned quickly that a feather bed was no match for a Dakota wind that sliced through log walls as if the wood weren't even there. You step inside a rough-hewn cabin, walls built fast from green timber still oozing sap, gaps stuffed with moss or mud that shrink and crack once the frost takes hold. The family inside greets you with a nod. They've already pulled out every buffalo robe they own, draping hides over bedding, layering quilts stitched from scraps of worn-out dresses and shirts. A mainstream historical fact is that by the mid-19th century, buffalo robes were one of the most traded goods on the plains, used as both bedding and makeshift doors against the cold. Without one, a pioneer was nearly naked against the winter night. The smell hits you first, a mix of smoke, damp wool, and something slightly sour animal fat used to grease boots and leather harnesses. The fire snaps in the hearth, offering the illusion of warmth, though if you step away from it, you'll find frost crawling up the inside of the cabin walls. You slide your hand over the plank bed frame, rough and splintering, the straw mattress prickling through the thin linen tick. It scratches, but it's warmer than sleeping on the floor, where cold seeps like an invisible tide. Historians still argue whether frontier families slept more soundly in such conditions or if constant discomfort meant they hovered half awake most nights. You lie down, pulling hides over yourself, hearing every creak of the log walls adjusting to the pressure of snow outside. Your breath curls upward into tiny ice crystals, glittering faintly in the flickering firelight. It's strange to think of your own exhalations decorating the rafters like silver lace. And then there are the sounds beyond. The lonely howl of wolves carried on the wind makes you pull the hide tighter. Yet a quirky little tidbit is that some settlers actually found the howls reassuring proof that predators were far away and not silently prowling just outside the cabin. The real threat, they whispered, wasn't wolves at all but the silence, which meant the animals were near. You close your eyes, trying to sleep, but your body remains tense, straining for warmth. The straw beneath you shifts, releasing a dry, grassy scent, while a faint draft sneaks past the chinking. You roll toward the fire, only to be met with the smoky tang that clings to every blanket, every hair on your head. Some nights the smoke filled cabins so thickly that eyes watered and throats burned. Yet to let the fire die meant risking frostbite before dawn. Your mind drifts as the cabin grows quieter. You sense the unease of those who came before you, men and women who had to teach themselves to rest even when conditions screamed for vigilance. The Wild West winter was a teacher, relentless and unforgiving, demanding that you adapt or perish. And in these opening moments of the night you realize that sleep here isn't about comfort. It's about endurance, a surrender to the cold's presence while stealing whatever scraps of warmth you can. Your eyelids grow heavy. The creak of the timbers, the whisper of snow piling against the door, and the faint rasp of someone's breath nearby weave together into a lullaby, not of peace but of survival. And as you drift into the fragile realm of sleep, the night outside deepens, colder, darker. Yet somehow, against all odds, you endure. The first time you feel that icy draft sliding across your face, you realize just how flimsy these walls really are. A log cabin might look sturdy in a painting or from the outside, but once you're curled beneath a scratchy blanket with the wind whistling through unseen cracks, you notice every flaw. You tug the buffalo hide higher over your shoulders, but the chill creeps in like a thief, slow and deliberate. Sleep doesn't come easily when your skin prickles and your nose grows numb, and you find yourself wondering how anyone survived winters here at all. A mainstream historical fact is that early frontier cabins were often thrown up in a matter of days. Logs were cut quickly, stacked and notched, sometimes with gaps left wide enough for daylight and certainly for cold air to pour through. Families stuffed whatever they had into those spaces: moss, mud, straw, even scraps of fabric. And yet, come January, the wind still found ways to slip in. You can imagine lying awake, counting the gusts the same way you might count sheep, each one brushing your cheek with a frosty whisper. You glance toward the corner where a child sleeps under a quilt, pieced together from old dresses, sleeves now serving as patchwork stars and stripes. The quilt is thin, but it's a lifeline against the drafts. The parents, meanwhile, sleep nearer the hearth, pretending they don't notice the icy air that gathers near the walls. A quirky tidbit: some settlers swore by hanging oiled paper over cracks. It wasn't quite glass, but it let in light while blocking a bit of wind. Imagine waking each morning to the sight of golden dawn filtering not through a window, but through translucent paper that rattled with every breeze. Historians still debate whether most families saw cabins as permanent homes or simply as stepping stones to something sturdier. Some argue that people treated them as temporary shelters until they could build finer houses. Others suggest that many lived out entire lifetimes within those drafty walls, too busy with survival to dream of anything grander. You shift, trying to tuck the hide tighter around your body, and your ear catches the faint whine of the wind threading through the rafters. The sound isn't constant, more like a wandering visitor, sliding along the seams of the walls, disappearing for a moment, then returning at an entirely new angle. It's like sleeping inside an instrument, the structure itself vibrating with the music of the cold. You wonder if those who grew up in such cabins found the sound comforting, the way some people today fall asleep to the hum of a fan or the patter of rain. The smell of pine resin drifts from the fresh-cut logs. Even months later, sap still oozes in small beads, sticky if you touch it in the dark. The resin glistens faintly in the dim firelight, a reminder of the trees that once stood tall before being hauled into service as shelter. You brush your fingers against the wall, feeling the rough bark still clinging in patches, and you can't help but think, this is no polished house, but a forest rearranged into walls, stubbornly holding back the winter. Your body shifts again, seeking comfort, but the uneven floor keeps tilting you toward the hearth. Many cabins had dirt floors, sometimes with fresh straw spread down each week to soften the hardness. And yet, in midwinter, frost crept upward from the ground itself, so that the earth seemed to breathe cold into the room. You imagine the strange sensation of trying to rest when the very floor is conspiring to chill you from below. The draft finds you again, lifting a corner of the quilt. You sigh, half amused, half exasperated, because the cold is as much a companion as any person in this room. There's no true barrier between outside and inside. It's all a negotiation, a fragile truce between your determination to rest and the winter's endless persistence. And in that half-wakeful state, you begin to accept it. Sleep here is never about perfect stillness. It's about learning to drift, despite the drafts, to fold the sound of the wind into your dreams, and to trust that the thin walls will hold, at least until morning. The night deepens, and you tug at the coverings again, realizing that warmth is never a given out here. It's an achievement, cobbled together with every hide, every stitched scrap, every bit of ingenuity the frontier could muster. Your fingers brush the rough texture of a buffalo robe spread over the bedding, its heavy weight pressing down like an anchor against the chill. It's well recorded that by the mid-1800s, buffalo hides weren't just trophies of the hunt, but everyday necessities, lining wagon seats by day and serving as thick, almost impenetrable blankets by night. Without them, settlers often faced the winter with far less protection than even their native neighbors. You breathe in the mingled scents of tanned leather and wool, each one earthy and pungent, hinting at how recently these items were part of living creatures. Layered over the hides is a quilt. Its patchwork squares a kaleidoscope of faded reds, indigo blues, and yellowed whites. Each scrap tells a story, a strip cut from a worn apron, another from the hem of a wedding dress, a piece salvaged from a shirt that saw too many summers. Quilts weren't merely covers. They were memory stitched into fabric, warmth drawn as much from emotion as from cotton batting. One curious detail is how settlers swore that the smell of a well-used quilt, musty, smoky, faintly sweet with lavender, if a sachet was tucked nearby, could bring comfort almost as much as its weight. It wasn't uncommon for quilts to be passed down generations, each winter adding more stains, more repairs, more history to the layers. You pull yours higher to your chin, and it feels as though all the hands that ever stitched it are tucking you in again. Still, the question lingers. How effective were these coverings, really, against the relentless prairie cold? Some researchers remain divided on whether layered textiles alone were enough to preserve body heat through the harshest nights, or whether it was the practice of bundling multiple family members together beneath them that made the real difference. Alone, you might still shiver. Together, the combined heat created a microclimate of survival. The wind groans at the corners of the cabin, but beneath these hides and quilts, you sense a fragile cocoon forming. The fire's glow paints the patchwork in amber hues, making even the dullest fabrics look golden. The robe presses on your chest, its smell thick with the prairie, while the quilt wraps you like a story in progress, a reminder that every scrap has been saved for a reason. Outside, the snow piles higher, muffling sound, but inside, the layered warmth becomes its own soft silence. You close your eyes and let the heavy coverings sink you into the straw mattress, scratching but bearable, and you marvel at how survival here is nothing glamorous, just the steady layering of hides, cloth, and hope, and with that, you drift closer to sleep, the quilts holding you like a stitched-together embrace. The bed beneath you crackles faintly, not from fire but from the dry stalks packed inside the tick. You shift your weight, and the straw pokes through the linen, scratching your skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Diaries of the time clearly note that most families slept on what they called ticks, large cloth sacks stuffed with straw, hay, or dried leaves. It was cheap, renewable, and easy to replace when the stuffing grew flat or foul, yet comfort was relative. Each toss and turn released the grassy scent of summer fields, a bittersweet perfume in the dead of winter. As you settle in, the mattress squeaks and rustles, making you keenly aware that you're lying not on a cushion but on last season's harvest. The unevenness presses against your ribs, so you wriggle to find a softer patch. Oddly, some pioneers added corn husks to the mix, claiming the husk stayed springy longer than plain straw. Of course, those husks came with sharp edges, and many a frontier sleeper woke with scratches across their arms. A strange comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. The air feels heavy with smoke and frost, but underneath it you notice the subtle fragrance of dried hay, a ghost of warmer months. Some children even enjoyed the smell so much that they resisted changing the tick when it turned musty, preferring the memory of autumn fields clinging to their bedding. You smile faintly at the thought, even as the prickle makes you shift again. It's still uncertain if these straw beds helped people truly rest or simply postponed exhaustion. Some experts suggest that settlers often slept in a state of half-wakefulness, bodies never fully relaxed because the bedding was stiff and the cold unrelenting. Others argue that after a day of back-breaking labor, anyone could collapse into straw and sleep like stone, itch or no itch. Your hand brushes the tick, and you imagine the careful hands that sewed it, reinforcing every corner to keep the stuffing from spilling out. When it grew too lumpy, families dragged it outside, beat the dust free with sticks, and refilled it with fresh straw. The process was a ritual, part of the rhythm of survival. In those moments, even bedding wasn't just for sleep, it was another reminder that nothing here stayed easy for long. You exhale, and the straw rustles in response, as if whispering back. The bed may itch, the cold may bite, but still, with enough layers above and enough determination within, you let yourself sink into the rustling warmth, clinging to the fragile notion of rest. The fire at the heart of the cabin is both savior and threat, a fickle companion that determines how well you sleep on nights like this. You glance toward the hearth, where flames flicker in a dance of oranges and blues, licking at the heavy logs stacked with care. Sparks leap upward, spiraling into smoke that curls around the rafters before finding its way out through a crude chimney. The smell is thick pine resin, damp wood, and faint char, and it clings to every quilt, every hide, every strand of hair in the room. Contemporary accounts confirm that many families kept their bedding as close to the fire as possible, sometimes spreading pallets directly on the hearthstones, desperate to soak in every scrap of warmth. You stretch your hands toward the glow, letting the heat soak your fingertips, but you also feel the danger. Fire is never truly safe here. A sudden crack from a log sends sparks onto the straw floor, and for a moment your chest tightens with dread. Countless records from the frontier describe cabins lost in seconds, flames feeding greedily on dry timber walls, while families fled into the snow with nothing but the clothes on their backs. To sleep near the fire meant warmth, But it also meant vulnerability, balanced precariously on the edge of disaster. You shift your gaze toward a small iron pot hanging in the flames. Its lid rattles gently as steam escapes, and you know the family keeps water simmering not just for cooking, but to release a bit of humidity into the arid air. One curious practice involved leaving a pot of soup or stew on the hearth overnight. Not only did it prevent the liquid from freezing solid, but it also offered a ready meal for anyone who woke shivering in the middle of the night. Imagine waking, ladling a steaming spoonful into a tin cup, and feeling the warmth spread through your body before returning to a cold bed. The fire pops again, reminding you of its constant presence, like a restless sleeper sharing the room. Some settlers trusted it too much, letting flames roar while they drifted off, only to wake in a cabin choking with smoke. Others, more cautious, kept fires small and steady, tending them with the care of a nurse at a sickbed. There's no clear consensus on whether most families actually managed a restful night beside the hearth, or if the need to rise, feed the flames and monitor for danger meant sleep was forever fractured. The fire was both comforter and tyrant, granting rest at the cost of vigilance. The children lie closest, tiny hands stretched toward the heat, cheeks flushed with its glow. Their dreams seem easier than yours, soft sighs rising above the crackle. Their small bodies curled like kittens before the warmth. Parents hover between them and the fire, shields of flesh and bone in case sparks leap too close. For the adults, rest is never pure. The mind ticks in rhythm with the flames. How many logs are left? Will the wind shift and send smoke back down the chimney? What if the fire dies before dawn? You close your eyes and try to imagine silence without the fire. Would you even dare? In some cabins, hearths doubled as beds. People piled furs on the hearthstones after the cooking was done, lying practically in the embers' glow. It was not uncommon for a stray cinder to burn a blanket or singe hair, and still the lure of warmth outweighed the risk. Oddly enough, some frontier humorists joked that a few burn marks on your quilt simply meant you were doing winter right. You lean closer, the heat kissing your face until your skin tingles. The smell intensifies, a mingling of soot and singed wool, not pleasant but oddly reassuring. Your ears catch the quiet sigh of the fire, a rhythm of inhale and exhale as logs collapse into glowing embers. It becomes a lullaby of sorts, hypnotic in its constancy. Still, you know sleep by the hearth is rarely deep. The fire demands attention, waking you with each pop, each gust that sends smoke swirling. Families often took turns, one member stirring every few hours to feed the blaze. Exhaustion was constant, yet the ritual ensured survival. Without the fire, the cabin would quickly descend into an icebox, breath frosting on the walls, straw bedding stiffening into frozen mats. As the night wears on, you lie on your side, facing the flames. Shadows flicker against the walls, stretching long and skeletal across the logs. They rise and fall like ghostly figures, companions summoned by the fire's dance. For some, these shapes brought unease. For others, they were familiar company, an evening's entertainment in a land without theaters. Children sometimes whispered that the shadows were protective spirits, keeping watch through the cold. Whether comfort or dread, the fire shaped not just the body's rest, but the mind's wandering. The smell of smoke lingers in your hair, tickling your nostrils each time you turn. Many settlers awoke with blackened faces, coughing through the morning, their eyes red from irritation. yet they accepted it as the price of warmth. You cough softly, imagining the soot settling in your lungs, and wonder how many lives it shortened quietly over years of winters. By midnight, the fire wanes, collapsing into a bed of glowing embers. Their light is softer now, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. You stretch your hands once more toward them, feeling the fading warmth. The family stirs, someone rises, adds a log, sparks leap again, and the rhythm continues. You're caught between sleep and waking, the fire forever demanding, forever sustaining. The fire is not gentle, not entirely. But in this place, in this brutal winter, it is the closest thing you have to a companion that never leaves. You breathe deeply, let the warmth sink into your bones, and accept that every frontier sleeper carried a secret pact with the flames. Trust them enough to rest, fear them enough to wake, and hope that morning comes before the last ember fades. You shift slightly in your straw tick, the buffalo robe slipping from your shoulder, and instantly the cold sneaks in, sharp as a knife. You tuck it back quickly and glance around the cabin. Every corner of the room is occupied, bodies curled, layered, huddled because here warmth is a collective affair. Contemporary observers often remarked that no one sleeps alone on the frontier unless forced. The logic was simple. Human heat, shared beneath hides and quilts, meant survival when temperatures outside plunged far below freezing. You can picture it vividly. Children tangled together like puppies, parents pressed close beside them, perhaps even a hired hand or a passing traveler, tucked in wherever space remained. The frontier wasn't a place for strict notions of privacy. Beds stretched wall to wall, or pallets sprawled across the floor, all bound together by the simple need to conserve warmth. In this arrangement you breathe not just your own air, but everyone else's, the cabin thick with moisture, your nostrils frosting with each collective exhale. One curious recollection comes from a settler woman who noted that guests were often tucked into bed without ceremony, sometimes sliding under covers already shared by half a dozen others. For modern ears it may sound unthinkable, yet for them the strangeness lay in not sharing. Even strangers on stagecoaches or in way stations sometimes doubled up on narrow bunks, shrugging at the awkwardness because frostbite was a far greater foe than modesty. Experts continue to disagree over whether this closeness fostered more harmony or more friction among frontier families. Some suggest that the enforced intimacy strengthened bonds, knitting families into resilient units. Others argue that it bred resentment, irritability, and exhaustion. Too many limbs tangling, too many coughs echoing through the night. Likely both were true depending on the family and the night. You stretch your arm, brushing against the warmth of another sleeper. The sensation is startling at first, the heat of another body, the faint rhythm of breath, but then it becomes oddly soothing. The weight of someone beside you anchors the cold away from your side, as if together you've created a pocket of resistance against winter's assault. There is a rhythm to these shared nights. A child squirms, kicking blankets loose, and instantly a parent tugs them back. Someone snores heavily, shaking the stillness, until a sharp elbow restores quiet. A baby fusses, is hushed with a lullaby, then drifts back into the fragile peace. All of this happens beneath the patchwork canopy of hides and quilts, an orchestra of small sounds rising and falling in tandem with the fire's crackle. Oddly enough, some families found comfort in arranging themselves like spokes on a wheel, heads together near the fire, feet radiating outward. This way, warmth pooled at the center, and everyone shared equally in the glow. Others preferred long rows, with the strongest bodies flanking the edges to shield the frilier ones in the middle. Children were nearly always placed at the warmest point, tucked between parents or layered under extra quilts. The smells of the room are intimate too, sweat mingling with smoke, wool damp from melting frost, the faint tang of unwashed clothes. In summer, such closeness might feel suffocating, but in winter, the mingled odors become secondary to survival. You breathe them in without judgment, each scent reminding you that you are not alone in this icy wilderness. Historians have long debated how much the culture of bed sharing influenced social norms in the West. Was it simply a pragmatic response to harsh winters, or did it subtly shape ideas of community and trust? After all, to share your bed was to entrust your safety, your vulnerability to another. And though the practice gradually faded with improved housing and heating, echoes linger in oral histories that describe those winters less as isolating hardship, and more as times when closeness itself was the only shield. Imagine for a moment the sensation of drifting off in such company. Your back presses against one body, your knees touch another, and you no longer distinguish where you end and your companions begin. Heat flows freely, blankets grow heavy, and your mind releases the constant vigilance that cold demands. In that web of bodies you discover not luxury, but a collective surrender to sleep. And yet, not all memories of shared sleeping were tender. Some diarists admitted frustration itching from straw ticks, elbows and ribs, whispers and coughs that shattered any chance at deep rest. Quarrels erupted over space, blankets, even the snoring of a single family member. But as one settler wrote dryly, "I'd rather be annoyed in warmth than frozen in silence." As the night lengthens, you realize that what seems suffocating at first becomes strangely reassuring. To hear the steady breathing of others, to know you are not facing the winter's cruelty alone, this too becomes part of the frontier lullaby. Sleep is no longer an individual act. It is a shared endeavor, stitched together as carefully as the patchwork quilt that covers you all. So you allow your body to melt into the warmth, ignoring the occasional kick or elbow, and accept the closeness as part of the rhythm of survival. Outside, the wind claws at the cabin walls, but here inside, beneath shared covers, humanity itself becomes the hearth, holding the night at bay until morning. You wake for a moment, startled by a faint shimmer above your head. At first you think it's dust catching the firelight, but then you realize it's frost, clinging delicately to the rafters like lace. Every exhalation you and the others release floats upward, condenses in the freezing air, and crystallizes into glittering patterns. Diaries from the era frequently mention waking to ceilings painted with ice, as though the cabin had grown its own winter decorations overnight. It looks enchanting, but of course it's a symptom of just how cold the nights truly are. You breathe out deliberately, watching your breath curl into the dim space, then sparkle as it freezes. The effect is oddly mesmerizing. Imagine trying to drift to sleep, knowing that even your body's warmest sighs cannot resist the grip of winter. The air itself becomes a reminder that the cabin is no fortress, merely a pause between the wilderness outside and the chill inside. There's something unsettling about frost forming indoors. A curious observation left by a trapper describes waking with his blanket frozen to the wall, fused by the condensation of his own breath. Others joked that it was possible to snow indoors if too many people slept in a crowded cabin. And indeed, on the most frigid nights, the moisture sometimes fell back down as a fine sprinkle, as though the room itself were caught in a private storm. Specialists remain divided on whether these frozen rafters posed real health risks. Some argue that constant dampness bred illness, from pneumonia to rheumatism, weakening already exhausted settlers. Others believe the air was too dry overall, and that the frost was little more than a cosmetic nuisance, melting quietly once the fire grew strong again. Perhaps it was both, beauty overhead masking the dangers of cold that seeped invisibly into lungs and joints. You pull the quilt tighter around your shoulders, listening to the faint creak of the timbers as the cold deepens. Above, the frost twinkles in rhythm with the fire's flicker, a strange imitation of stars. The effect is beautiful, almost peaceful, yet you know it means the room is freezing. Your breath comes out in a soft plume, drifting upward to join the growing constellation on the beams. One surprising trick some families used was hanging extra sheets or canvas beneath the rafters, creating a kind of false ceiling that caught frost before it could fall on sleepers. Imagine waking without a dusting of ice in your hair, thanks to a makeshift canopy strung from nails and ropes. It wasn't elegant, but on the frontier, elegance had no place, only practicality. Your ears catch the faint drip of melting. A warmer draft from the hearth has reached the frost, loosening it, sending tiny droplets down onto bedding below. You flinch at the cold kiss of water on your cheek, then laugh softly at the absurdity. To be roused by indoor icicles is a memory few outside this world would ever know. The rafters creak again, settling under the weight of snow piled thick on the roof. Each groan makes you wonder if the whole structure will give way. Settlers sometimes rose at dawn to shovel their roofs bare, knowing that too much snow might crush the cabin. The frozen lace above you is only the delicate surface of a far heavier burden pressing down. Still, there is a strange comfort in the frost. In the dim firelight, it glimmers like silver, turning the rough cabin into a kind of cathedral. Children might have seen angels in the patterns, tracing them with sleepy eyes before drifting off again. Perhaps that's how the mind survived such conditions, by finding beauty even in breath turned brittle and frozen. You curl closer beneath the hides, aware that every inhalation and exhalation will keep building that icy ceiling, and you realize that here, even the act of breathing leaves a mark, proof of endurance against the cold. The frost is fragile, temporary, but it's also a record of the night, a shimmering diary written by lungs and fire and darkness. So you close your eyes again, listening to the rafters groan, watching the silver lace fade in and out of sight, and allow yourself to drift in the knowledge that even in the harshest cold, life leaves behind beauty. And when morning comes, and the frost melts into droplets pattering softly onto the quilts, you'll know that the cabin has survived another night, thin walls, frozen rafters, restless sleep, and all. The fire is still glowing faintly when you stir, but the cold has crept back into your bones. You shiver and tuck the quilt higher, wondering what else people did to trick their bodies into believing they were warm enough to sleep. The answer, more often than not, came in the form of a drink. It's well documented that whiskey, brandy, or any hard liquor was a common nightcap on the frontier. Settlers believed a swig before bed would warm the blood, chasing away the night chill. You picture yourself lifting a tin cup, the liquid burning down your throat, spreading heat outward for just a few minutes, an illusion of comfort as fleeting as the sparks in the hearth. The warmth is deceptive, though. You know now what they didn't. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, making you feel warm while your body actually loses heat faster. Still, it's easy to understand why it became ritual. After days of cutting wood, tending livestock, and battling snow, that fiery taste was less about medicine and more about relief. The bottle passed from hand to hand wasn't just a physical aid. It was a reminder of shared humanity, a small rebellion against the cold. Strangely enough, some settlers even gave small doses to children. One mother wrote in her diary that a sip of whiskey settled the child to sleep quicker than rocking. The practice might horrify you today, but in those nights when frost rimmed the windows and firewood was scarce, desperation blurred the lines between remedy and risk. Not everyone agreed on the wisdom of spirits. Some church leaders scolded the reliance on alcohol, urging families to seek warmth in prayer rather than bottles. Others believed in moderation, suggesting that hot cider or mulled wine offered comfort without the harsh bite of whiskey. In boarding houses, coffee sometimes replaced stronger, drinker-bitter, bracing brew that kept boarders awake longer, but was thought to guard against chills. There's no clear consensus among historians about just how widespread nightly drinking was, but it undeniably shaped the rhythms of sleep in many cabins and outposts. You imagine yourself cradling a steaming mug of something warm, perhaps not whiskey, but milk or broth heated over the coals. The steam curls upward, softening the sharpness of the cabin air, moistening your throat raw from smoke. Even the act of sipping slowly, savoring warmth on your lips, helps lull your mind toward rest. This small ritual of drinking before bed, whatever the liquid, became as important as quilts or buffalo hides, part of the nightly preparation for enduring the dark. A curious footnote appears in some accounts. Frontier folks sometimes added strange ingredients to their nightcaps. Herbs gathered in summer mint, sage, or even spruce needles were steeped in hot water for teas meant to calm the body and soothe digestion. One settler swore by adding bear grease to hot milk, claiming it lined the stomach with warmth. Whether effective or not, these concoctions reveal the endless experimentation of people fighting to outwit the cold. The fire crackles, and you picture the bottle or kettle passing around the room. Each sip is a pause, a sigh of relief, a few moments when the cold seems distant. Perhaps laughter erupts low, tired chuckles that echo off the log walls. Perhaps arguments break out, tempers sharpened by drink and fatigue. Alcohol had that dual nature, offering fleeting comfort but sometimes sowing discord. Families knew both sides of its power. You close your eyes and pretend you can taste the sharp tang on your tongue. For a moment it feels real, the warmth spreading, the dizziness nudging you closer to sleep. And you understand why so many turn to these nightcaps not out of ignorance, but out of need. When every breath is frosty, when even your bed feels like straw in an icebox, a burning sip in the throat is more than indulgence. It is ritual, survival, a way to coax the body into surrendering to rest. You settle deeper under the covers, half dreaming of kettles and mugs, of whiskey shared and fires tended, of laughter rising above the howling wind. Sleep steals over you not because you are warm enough, but because you have convinced yourself that you are. And in this land of brutal winters, sometimes belief itself is the strongest medicine. The cup is empty, the warmth of that last sip already fading, and you realize that not every night was confined to bed. Sometimes sleep was interrupted by the steady call of duty. Out here, life did not pause because the snow fell or the night deepened. Animals in the barn still needed checking, fires needed tending, and water needed hauling. Contemporary diaries are filled with weary notes of rising in darkness, to fetch wood or look in on livestock. Sleep on the frontier was more a patchwork of stolen hours than an uninterrupted stretch. Imagine yourself pulling on stiff boots, the leather frozen into awkward shapes by the cold. Your breath plumes in front of you, visible even inside the cabin. A lantern hisses faintly as it's lit, filling the room with the smell of oil and smoke. You tug a cloak around your shoulders, grit your teeth, and step into the snow. The shock is immediate, air like needles against your cheeks, silence so complete you hear the blood in your ears. The sky is a sheet of dark velvet, pierced with stars that blaze like frozen sparks. It's well recorded that livestock often meant the difference between life and starvation, so families never risked leaving them unattended. Horses, cattle, or sheep had to be fed and watered, even at midnight. A small child might be sent to carry buckets, their tiny body swallowed in layers of wool, trudging behind a parent. And if the water troughs froze solid, someone had to break the ice, bare hands stinging in the frigid air. You feel the ache in your own knuckles just imagining it. One curious custom among some settlers was to bring smaller animals indoors during the coldest nights. Chickens clucked from corners of cabins, piglets squealed near the hearth, and goats bleated softly in the shadows. It may sound chaotic, but their warmth contributed to the household's own survival. Children sometimes treated these nights like games, drifting to sleep with a hen perched near their straw tick. Still, historians debate how much rest was truly possible when nightly chores intruded. Some argue that these midnight interruptions fractured sleep into two distinct phases, what later scholars called first sleep and second sleep. Others doubt whether frontier families had the luxury of consistent patterns at all, suggesting that exhaustion dictated when and how they rested, regardless of theories. What's certain is that you rarely lay still for long without someone rising to tend to something. You picture yourself trudging through knee-deep snow, lanterns swinging, shadows stretching across white drifts. Each step crunches loudly, a reminder that you are utterly alone in this frozen expanse. The barn looms like a dark giant, doors stiff with frost. Inside, the air is warmer, thick with the smell of hay, manure, and steaming breath. Animals stir, lowing or snorting in recognition. You scatter feed, break ice from water buckets, stroke a horse's nose as it exhales mist into your palm. For a few moments, you forget your own discomfort in the rhythm of care. Then comes the return. The walk back feels longer, your body heavier, fatigue pressing down like a second quilt. The lantern sputters, your boots slip on patches of ice, and the thought of crawling back under covers becomes the only motivation. When you finally push through the cabin door, the blast of smoky heat is both relief and assault. Your skin prickles as sensation returns, and you shed frozen layers to rejoin the cluster of sleepers. Oddly, some families treated these midnight chores as almost meditative. A father once wrote that his quiet walks to the barn were the only moments of peace in the day, when the stars felt close enough to touch and the silence gave space for thought. Others, less romantic, recorded only exhaustion. Rose thrice in the night for wood and stock feel half-dead come morning. Both perspectives tell the same truth. Sleep was never simple here. back beneath the quilts, your body still tingling from the cold. You sink into straw that creaks like dry bones. The warmth of others has already returned to the bed, and you burrow in gratefully, listening to the fire crackle back into rhythm. Your eyes flutter closed, and you realize that out here, sleep is never uninterrupted. It is a bargain, traded in fragments between chores, hunger, cold, and care. Yet somehow, in those fragments, you survive. And so you let your mind drift once more, knowing the animals are safe, the fire still burns, and the snow outside continues to fall in its endless hush. Sleep, even in pieces, becomes enough. You roll onto your side, pressing closer to the warmth, but something still feels missing. The hides and quilts are heavy, the fire crackles, yet the cold finds a way through. You reach for the bundle at your feet, moccasins lined with fur, thick as mittens, and a rough shirt meant for sleeping. Out here, you never undress for bed, you simply change layers. Travelers' journals often stress that to sleep unclothed in winter is to court death. The Wild West night required preparation as carefully considered as a soldier's armor. Your fingers trace the fur of the moccasins, soft yet smelling faintly of smoke from the hearth. It's clear that many settlers borrowed heavily from indigenous practices when it came to sleeping attire. Native peoples of the plains and Rockies had long perfected the art of winter rest, layering furs, wrapping feet, and even sewing sleep garments from rabbit skins. European newcomers, used to linen nightshirts, quickly realized those thin fabrics were useless here. It's well recorded that settlers began copying native winter dress buckskin leggings, deerskin mittens, and layered moccasins, adapting them for their own nights. One curious memory left by a trapper describes stuffing grass inside his moccasins before bed, claiming it insulated better than socks. Children, too, often slept with their shoes on, tucking their feet into the straw tick without complaint. To modern ears, it sounds uncomfortable, but to them, the comfort of warmth outweighed the itch of grass or the stiffness of leather. Specialists remain divided over how much settlers truly integrated indigenous sleeping customs into their own routines. Some suggest it was widespread and necessary for survival, while others argue that pride and prejudice kept many from fully embracing native methods, even when it would have made their nights far easier. What is certain is that those who did adapt had a better chance of waking without frostbite on toes and fingers. You tug an extra layer across your chest, maybe a shawl or a coat left on rather than folded away. It smells of sweat and wood smoke, rough against your skin, but it traps heat. The quilt presses heavier on top, and beneath it, you feel like a bundle of mismatched fabrics and furs stitched together. Yet in this form you are armored against the night. Oddly enough, some families even wrapped their heads in scarves or wore woolen caps to bed. The body loses heat most quickly through the scalp, and settlers joked that a good night's rest required a hat as well as a pillow. Children often looked like tiny bundles of cloth, barely their faces visible, swaddled in layer after layer until they could hardly move. But they slept, and that was all that mattered. The sounds of the room are muffled now, softened by all this fabric. The fire crackles like distant applause, the wind rattles faintly against the logs, and beneath it all is the rhythm of breathing yours. Theirs, the whole room wrapped in layers. You shift slightly, your moccasins brushing against another's foot, and you smile in the dark. Warmth is not elegance here, it is improvisation, the clever use of whatever materials lie at hand. Historians still puzzle over whether settlers saw these nights as hardship or simply routine. Did they curse each extra layer, each itch of fur, each creak of stiff leather, or did they accept it as life, no stranger than drawing water or chopping wood? Perhaps, over time, the layers ceased to feel strange and became as natural as the cold itself. You close your eyes, adjusting the fur at your feet, and imagine how it must have felt to slip into such garments after a day in the snow. The relief of warmth, however imperfect, must have been like slipping into safety. The Wild West demanded toughness, but it also demanded softness. The softness of furs, the embrace of wool, the cocoon of hides that let a weary body surrender to rest. And so you lie there, bundled, armored in moccasins and shawls, and let yourself drift. The night presses cold against the cabin, but your body is its own fortress now, layered with the wisdom of those who came before, and somewhere in that balance between scratchy straw, smoky quilts, and soft fur, you find enough comfort to let sleep take you once more. You stir again, this time not from cold but from sound. At first it's faint, so faint you think it might be the fire's crackle or the creak of timber, but then it rises, a long, mournful howl drifting through the night. Your chest tightens instinctively. Out beyond the thin log walls, the wilderness is alive. Wolves roam the prairie and the foothills, their cries carrying far across the frozen ground. Contemporary travelers often wrote that the wolf's howl was the voice of the plains at night, a reminder that humans were never truly alone, no matter how isolated the cabin felt. The sound is piercing, eerie, and oddly beautiful. It rises and falls, sometimes answered by a chorus farther away, until the whole horizon seems to echo with it. You picture the pack moving across snowdrifts, paws silent, breath steaming, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. To hear them from inside a cabin is to be reminded how thin your shelter truly is. The wall between you and them is just logs, moss, and prayer. A curious anecdote survives from a settler boy who claimed he slept better when wolves howled. It meant they were far away, he explained, because when wolves are close they do not sing. Strange logic, but in its way it makes sense. Silence, heavy and watchful, could feel more menacing than those distant cries. Experts remain divided on how often wolves actually threatened frontier families. Some accounts describe livestock torn apart, desperate nights guarding barns with rifles in hand. Others suggest the danger was exaggerated, that wolves preferred deer and buffalo, rarely daring to challenge humans and less starving. What all agree on, however, is the psychological weight their presence carried. Even if the wolves never approached, their voices haunted the edges of sleep. You shift beneath the quilt, ears straining despite yourself. Another howl rises, closer this time, joined by a scatter of barks. Someone else in the cabin stirs, mutters, pulls the covers higher. Fear spreads like the cold, silent, shared, unspoken. You imagine how children must have clung to their parents, whispering prayers or begging for stories to drown the noise. Oddly enough, not all encounters were fearful. Some trappers and scouts claimed the howling became a kind of companion. One man described it as company in the emptiness, the wolves' voices making him feel lesser drift in the vast frozen landscape. For solitary souls, the pack's song was proof of other life enduring the winter too. The night stretches on, the cries rising and falling like a tide. You close your eyes, trying to fold the sound into your drifting thoughts, but it keeps returning, each note a reminder of the wild pressing against the fragile barrier of your cabin. You breathe in smoke, sweat, wool, and the faint tang of fear. Outside, eyes gleam, unseen but felt. You wonder what it was like to face that balance every night, the need for sleep wrestling with the knowledge that predators prowl just beyond. Did people truly rest, or did they hover in half-dreams? One ear always tuned to the wilderness? Scholars still argue about how deep or restorative frontier sleep could ever be under such conditions. Perhaps it was never full surrender, always a compromise between exhaustion and vigilance. The howling fades slowly, drifting into the distance, until only the creak of rafters and the sigh of wind remain. Relief washes over the room. You can feel it even without words, a loosening of shoulders, a deepening of breath. For tonight, the wolves have passed. You let your body sink into the straw, feeling the itchy prickle against your skin, the heavy press of hides above you. The fear lingers faintly, like a shadow in the corner, but fatigue pulls harder. The wilderness is vast, the wolves are many, and yet you are here inside, alive. That thin line between danger and safety, between howl and silence, becomes the edge of your sleep. And so you drift again, half dreaming of silver eyes in the snow, of voices calling across the night, of warmth pressed close inside the cabin walls. Sleep may be fragile, but it comes nonetheless, wrapping you as tightly as the quilts, holding you steady until morning's pale light returns. The wolves drift from your dreams, leaving you with another sound, the hiss and crackle of something heating by the fire. You blink awake enough to notice a small bundle of stones wrapped in cloth, pulled from the hearth and tucked into the foot of a bed. The warmth radiates outward, faint but steady, like a secret fire beneath the covers. It's well documented in pioneer letters that people used heated stones or bricks to take the bite out of winter bedding. The method was simple. Place the stones in the embers until they glowed faintly, then carry them carefully using tongs or cloth, and slip them under quilts or inside foot warmers. The sensation is immediate relief. Your toes, numb and stiff, slowly thaw against the improvised heater. The warmth doesn't last forever, but for those first precious minutes, it feels like heaven. Some families rotated multiple stones through the night, trading one cooling lump for another fresh from the fire. The routine became part of bedtime, as ingrained as saying prayers or banking the hearth. One curious variation involved wrapping heated potatoes or even turnips in cloth. Not only did they serve as makeshift bed warmers, but in the morning they could be eaten for breakfast slightly smoky, but still edible. Children sometimes delighted in the double duty, sleeping with supper, as one diary joked. Others used flat irons, the same heavy tools meant for pressing clothes, placed inside wooden foot warmers, and slid beneath blankets. The danger, of course, was always burns. Too hot a stone or poorly wrapped brick could scorch a quilt or leave a blister. It's still debated whether these practices were borrowed from Europe or improvised anew in America. Some scholars trace them back to medieval warming pans, metal containers filled with embers and slipped between sheets, while others argue that the frontier's lack of luxuries forced settlers to rediscover the idea independently. Either way, the principle was the same, a pocket of heat against the immensity of cold. You can feel the texture of the stone through the cloth, rough and heavy against your ankle. The warmth pulses slowly, like a fading heartbeat, and you instinctively curl your feet around it, hoarding its energy. In the silence of the cabin, such small comforts grow immense. The family sleeps easier knowing at least one corner of the bed is not ice. Oddly enough, some settlers extended the idea beyond the hearth. On long journeys, wagoners heated stones in roadside fires, wrapped them in blankets, and placed them at the bottom of beds in their wagons. Travelers even carried them under coats during sleigh rides, pressing the warmth to their chests like primitive hot water bottles. It was clumsy but effective, a stubborn refusal to surrender to the cold. You watch the glow of the hearth flicker, knowing another stone will be ready soon. Someone stirs, rises quietly, retrieves it with iron tongs and replaces the cooling one at your feet. The exchange is seamless, almost ritualistic, a midnight dance performed half asleep. The cycle keeps the bed livable, the cold pushed just far enough away to allow rest. The smell of hot cloth mingles with smoke, faintly singed but comforting. You breathe it in, eyelids heavy, and marvel at how survival depends not on grand inventions but on simple, clever tricks. A stone from the fire becomes the difference between shivering through the night and slipping into real sleep. Historians still wonder how much these nightly practices shaped the rhythm of frontier life. Did the constant tending of fires, of stones, of blankets, fracture sleep into restless fragments? Or did it create a steady cadence that people grew accustomed to, as natural as the crow of a rooster at dawn? Perhaps both are true depending on the household. What's certain is that without such measures, many nights would have been unbearable. Your toes relax, your legs loosen, and the weight of exhaustion finally overtakes the lingering chill. You curl tighter around the warmth, sighing as if the stone itself had answered your body's plea. And with that small gift from the fire, you drift once again, surrendering to the long winter night, knowing that survival lies in these fragile moments of heat stolen from the flames. The stone at your feet cools to a dull lump, and you sense the cold pressing back in. Yet when you run your hand along the cabin wall, it doesn't feel as icy as before. You realize something unusual is happening outside. Snow has drifted high against the logs, and instead of chilling the home further, it insulates it like a natural blanket. Contemporary accounts often note that settlers learned to embrace snow as an ally. Packed tightly around a cabin, it sealed cracks, softened howling winds, and muffled the groaning timbers until the whole structure felt cocooned in silence. Your palm rests against the rough timber, and you imagine how this insulation worked. Snow, full of trapped air, holds heat more than bare wood or open air. It's well documented that sod houses dug into the earth and topped with thick layers of turf stayed warmer in winter than the draftiest log cabins. Many frontier families reported that snow clung to these sod roofs, forming a second layer of insulation that turned them into snug, earthen dens. From the outside, they resembled lumps of ground covered in frost, but inside they pulsed with the heat of fire and bodies. One curious story tells of a family waking after a storm to find their entire cabin buried, the door sealed shut by drifts. At first it felt like a trap, but soon they realized the snow created an uncanny stillness. The wind completely cut off, the interior warmer than they had felt all season. They tunneled out for light and air, but admitted the burial saved them from frostbite. Children sometimes delighted in it, calling their homes snow forts, pretending the wilderness had transformed into a giant playground. Experts continue to discuss whether sod homes or log cabins offered the better defense against winter. Some argue that sod, though warmer, bred dampness and pests, while others insist that logs, if properly chinked and sealed, lasted longer and resisted collapse. The debate underscores how settlers constantly weighed one imperfection against another, making do with whichever flaws they could endure. For many, the ultimate insulation was simply abundance, piling on whatever nature provided, whether mud, turf, or snow itself. You lean back against the wall and listen. The usual whistle of wind through the cracks is quieter, almost gone. Instead, there's a hushed quality, as though the snow outside has swallowed the world. It's not silence, exactly. It's a softer, muted soundscape, like resting under a heavy quilt. The snow presses close, and the cabin becomes a burrow, a den carved against the endless winter. Oddly enough, some families deliberately shoveled snow up against their walls, piling drifts as high as possible to help block drafts. The practice may sound backward, but anyone who has stepped into an igloo knows how snow can trap warmth. Farmers even did the same for barns, protecting animals with walls of frozen air. Survival meant knowing that not everything cold was an enemy. The scent inside the cabin shifts as well. Without the wind dragging smoke back down the chimney, the air grows clearer, softer. You breathe more easily, your chest relaxing for the first time in nights. The logs still creak, but less urgently, as though relieved by the extra support. Above, frost glitters faintly on the rafters, shimmering like hidden constellations. Historians sometimes muse that these buried cabins and sod houses blurred the line between human shelter and the natural world. Were families truly separate from the wilderness, or simply borrowing its structures, earth, snow, grass to build their fragile havens? The question lingers as you close your eyes and imagine the cabin hidden beneath white drifts, invisible to wolves and wind alike, a secret pocket of warmth in a vast, frozen plain. Your body sinks deeper into the straw tick, the hides pressing down, the air gentler now that snow walls surround you. It feels like resting inside a shell, a quiet refuge carved not by choice but by necessity. The Wild West winter may be brutal, but even here, nature offers strange mercies. And as you drift towards sleep again, you understand that survival is not always about fighting the elements sometimes. It is about letting them enfold you. You wake to an ache in your joints, deep and dull, the kind of pain that makes every movement feel twice as heavy. It's not just fatigue, it's the slow toll of cold on the body. Settlers wrote often about winter illnesses, and they weren't just tales of frostbitten fingers or noses blackened by the wind. It's well documented that rheumatism, chilblains, and chest infections were constant companions, gnawing at people who had no way to keep cabins warm through the night. To sleep in such conditions wasn't merely uncomfortable. It sometimes meant waking weaker than before. You shift in the straw tick, and a sharp sting runs up your toes. Frostbite crept easily into extremities, especially when blankets slipped or fires burned too low. One woman recalled waking with her hair frozen to the wall where her damp breath had iced overnight. Another described her child's feet blistered after a night too near a drafty door. These were not accidents, they were routine hazards of winter life. A curious detail surfaces in frontier remedies. Some settlers rubbed goose grease or bear fat into their skin before bed, believing the thick layer would insulate them from the cold and ward off frostbite. Children went to sleep, smelling of smoke and animal fat, sticky beneath their quilts, their parents praying it would be enough. The method may sound odd, yet many swore it worked. Even today, anthropologists note how similar techniques were used by Arctic peoples, proving that desperation often leads to shared invention across cultures. Scholars continue to debate whether poor sleep itself worsened health, or if the illnesses came first and fractured rest later. Did the cold cause sleepless nights, leaving bodies vulnerable, or did exhaustion from broken sleep open the door to pneumonia and fevers? The cause and effect remain uncertain, but the pattern is clear. Winter weakened even the hardiest pioneers, and many never fully recovered from what seemed at first a simple chill. You imagine yourself lying beneath quilts heavy with frost, your breath wheezing, each cough shaking the fragile warmth you've built. In the darkness, the sound of hacking coughs was common in children, elders, even the strongest men reduced to gasping through smoke-thick air. Some diaries describe entire households awake at once, tending the sick while the fire sputtered, the night dragging on endlessly. Oddly, there were also cures that blurred the line between medicine and superstition. Settlers sometimes tucked onions into their socks to draw out fevers, or placed garlic under pillows as protection against chills. Warm stones weren't just for feet, they were pressed against chests to ease bronchitis, or held against bellies to soothe cramps. Whether these treatments worked or not, they offered comfort, and perhaps that mattered most. You shift again, stretching stiff arms beneath the hides. The ache lingers, but in the cabin you notice how the body adapts. Sleep, though broken and restless, still comes. The mind learns to ignore discomfort, or at least to carry it into dreams. One frontier doctor noted that his patients slept through pain as through the wind, constant but tolerable. Perhaps it was a kind of numbness, both physical and mental, that allowed survival. The fire sighs low, the room colder now. Someone stirs, coughing in the corner, then settles again with a groan. The sound reminds you how thin the line was between enduring winter and succumbing to it. There were no antibiotics, no modern heating, no real relief, only quilts, grease, herbs, and the stubborn will to see morning. You close your eyes, the ache dull but manageable, and think about how many nights on frontier ended this way. Bodies sore, lungs raw, minds weary, and yet they endured. Illness was part of the season, as inevitable as snow, and though it marked them with pain, it also taught them resilience. And so you sink back into the straw, sighing with the weight of your body, letting the ache become background noise. You may not wake stronger, but you will wake, and on the frontier that alone was victory. The cough in the corner fades, replaced by another sound, the soft scrape of iron against wood. Someone has risen from the quilts, padding toward the hearth, stirring the fire. You half open your eyes, catching the glow of embers fanned into flame again. Sleep here is never truly shared all at once. Each night, a silent pact forms. Someone must always be awake to watch the fire. Contemporary records emphasize that leaving a blaze untended could spell disaster, whether by freezing or by flames spreading unchecked. A household in winter lived by its fire, guarded as faithfully as a newborn child. You roll onto your back, feeling the weight of quilts shift across your chest, and watch as the figure feeds another log into the hearth. The sparks leap, shadows dancing against the walls, and the familiar creak of the cabin seems to answer. You know that without this vigilance, the night would be far more dangerous. Families often rotated the task, each member taking turns to rise, poke the coals, and ensure the woodpile lasted until dawn. It was well recorded that even children as young as 8 were expected to take a shift, bleary-eyed but dutiful, so the household never faced a dark, frozen silence. One curious note from a settler's diary describes how a family kept a small hourglass on the mantel, turning it each time someone rose, so they would know when another needed to relieve them. The practice gave structure to the night, transforming chaotic awakenings into a ritual. In another account, a family relied on their dog, trained to bark when the fire burned too low. The animal became a living alarm clock, nudging sleepers awake with insistent paws. Experts still debate whether constant vigilance was truly necessary, or if some households exaggerated the danger. Some argue that fires banked carefully covered with ash to smolder slowly could last until morning without attention. Others point to frequent reports of smothered coals, chilled cabins, or catastrophic blazes as proof that watchfulness was justified. The truth likely varied. A careless sleeper might wake to a frostbitten family, while a cautious one gave up rest to guarantee survival. You picture yourself in the role now, rising quietly, shoulders wrapped in a shawl, eyes gritty with fatigue. The floor is cold against your feet, the straw mattress sighing as you leave it. The fire glows faintly, a pulsing red heart at the room's center. You kneel, stir the coals, and hear the sigh as flames flare. Your face prickles from the heat while your back shivers from the draft. For a moment you are alone with the night, the rest of the household bundled together, trusting you to guard their warmth. Oddly enough, some watchers use the time to pray, to think, or even to compose songs and stories. One young man wrote that his best verses came between logs when the silence of the cabin pressed close and the wolves howled outside. Others confessed that the watch was misery, hours spent fighting sleep while counting sparks. Still, those solitary moments became woven into memory, as much a part of the frontier as the chopping of wood or the planting of corn. The smell of the fire grows stronger as the new log catches, smoke curling lazily toward the chimney. You breathe it in, eyes half closed, and understand why this ritual persisted. The fire is not simply a source of heat. It is a lifeline, fragile, demanding, alive. To guard it is to guard everyone under the roof. You return to bed, sliding carefully back under the hides, and feel the warmth of others envelop you. Someone else will rise in another hour, repeating the ritual, ensuring the rhythm continues until dawn. Sleep comes in fragments, punctuated by duty, yet it comes nonetheless. Historians sometimes describe frontier nights as communal marathons, each person carrying a portion of the burden. No one resting fully but all surviving together. You sense that truth now as you let your body relax again, comforted by the knowledge that the fire will not be left alone. You drift into sleep not because the night is safe, but because someone else has taken your place in the vigil. And so the cabin breathes through the darkness, fire and humans alike keeping each other alive, one log at a time, one watch after another, until morning. Sleep here is never empty. It's thick with sensation, with memory, with the stubborn persistence of a mind that refuses to be quiet, even when the body is begging for rest. You close your eyes, and almost immediately the cold, the smoke, and the faint scratching of straw fold themselves into your dreams. Contemporary journals often mention that winters on the frontier brought a different kind of dreaming, strange, vivid, restless. Hunger gnawed at bellies, fear prowled in the corners, And yet, even in exhaustion, the mind spun elaborate visions through the night. You shift beneath the heavy hides, half asleep, and imagine yourself still out in the snow, trudging endlessly through drifts that swallow your knees. The dream feels real, your body aching as though it's actually happening. Then a sound jolts you, not wolves this time, but laughter thin, brittle, echoing across a frozen plain. Dreams here often stitch the ordinary with the unsettling reflections of the daily struggle. Families describe dreams of endless woodpiles that vanished as soon as they were stacked, or of cabins collapsing under snow, or of tables groaning with food no one could touch. One curious account survives from a pioneer woman who claimed she dreamt of bread almost every night during one particularly harsh winter. Loaves piled to the ceiling, she wrote, yet none for us to eat. Hunger entered her sleep as insistently as it shaped her waking hours. Others spoke of dreaming in fragments, interrupted by cold wakes and watch shifts, each dream resuming where it had left off, as though the mind was weaving a continuous story through broken hours. Experts remain divided on whether frontier dreams were truly altered by cold and hunger, or whether people simply remembered them more vividly because their sleep was so shallow. Some argue that fragmented rest made dreams feel sharper, etched into memory like frost on glass. Others believe deprivation itself, food, warmth, safety, forced the subconscious to dramatize those needs in nightly visions. Whatever the reason, the dreams of the Wild West winters were rarely gentle. You turn in the straw, quilts sliding against your chin, and drift into another vision. The fire in your dream roars impossibly bright, flames licking higher than the rafters, but no one moves to stop it. Instead, everyone sits quietly, watching the blaze consume the cabin, their faces calm, as if surrender were easier than struggle. You jolt awake, breath shallow, and realize how often settlers must have dreamed of fire, sometimes savior, sometimes enemy. The very thing that kept them alive also haunted their sleep. Oddly enough, not all dreams were grim. Some children recalled winter nights filled with images of green meadows, warm rivers, and summer breezes. It was as though their minds offered them reprieve, tiny vacations from the brutal present. One boy remembered dreaming of chasing butterflies through fields, only to wake beneath a buffalo hide stiff with frost. His disappointment was sharp, but the memory lingered as a kind of hope. You breathe in the smoky air, letting the haze settle your thoughts, and you realize your own mind is doing the same, trying to balance dread with comfort, weaving scraps of memory into something survivable. In the hush of the cabin, where every creak of wood and sigh of sleepers blends into a background hum, your thoughts blur again into images not quite real, not quite false. Historians sometimes debate whether these restless, vivid dreams shaped behavior during the day. Did constant nightmares wear down the spirit, or did they fortify resilience by rehearsing danger in the safety of sleep? There's no simple answer. But when you wake with frost crystals glinting above you and the smell of smoke still in your nose, the dream never feels far from reality. You curl tighter, pressing your face into the musty quilt, and surrender again to whatever visions the night brings. Whether they are warnings, comforts, or simply echoes of hunger and cold, they are part of survival too. For in the Wild West, even dreams were shaped by winter, becoming another landscape to endure until morning. When morning finally comes to the prairie towns, you discover that not every bed is a family nest tucked inside a cabin. Sometimes you are in a boarding house, where privacy vanishes entirely and warmth is rationed like bread. It's well recorded that frontier towns sprouted makeshift hotels, often little more than two-story shacks with drafty windows where miners, merchants, or travelers could pay a few coins for a place to lie down. But instead of comfort, what you find is a jumble of bodies crammed together, each chasing warmth, none fully at ease. You step into such a room. The air is thick with the mingled odors of tobacco, sweat, and damp wool. Rough plank floors creak beneath layers of straw pallets. A line of iron cots squeals whenever someone rolls over. Quilts are shared between strangers, and the walls are so thin you can hear the wind's low moan threading through every crack. Compared to the isolation of a homestead, this is a symphony of restless sounds. One curious note survives from a traveler who wrote of lying in a boarding house bed, beside a man whose name I never knew, yet whose snore I shall remember all my life. Strangers pressed so close they sometimes woke tangled in each other's blankets. Awkward introductions made only after sunrise. In some towns men slept in shifts, a bed used by one customer through the night and another by day, a practice called hot bedding. The sheets rarely cooled, but neither did they wash. Specialists remained divided over whether such communal lodging brought more safety or more sickness. On one hand, the shared heat spared many from freezing when wood was scarce. On the other, the closeness spread coughs, lice, and worse, typhus, tuberculosis, influenza, all thrived in rooms where 20 or 30 men breathed the same smoky air. Some historians suggest that boarding houses hastened outbreaks that swept entire towns. Others argue they were simply unavoidable, in places where demand far outstripped supply. You lie down on a straw tick in such a room, listening to the chorus, one man murmuring prayers in his sleep, another grinding his teeth, a third muttering in a dream. The fire in the corner stove pops occasionally, but its warmth reaches only the nearest beds. Those farthest away pull coats tighter, their breath visible in faint clouds. The air smells of iron from the stove and unwashed wool, sharp enough to sting your nose. Oddly enough, boarding houses sometimes offered luxuries unheard of on lonely farms. Warm bricks wrapped in cloth might be passed around, or a kettle of coffee kept simmering for those who couldn't sleep. A landlady might sing softly to quiet children, her voice rising above the snores and coughs. And though the conditions were harsh, for some the noise itself was reassuring proof that they were not alone in the dark. You shift, rolling onto your side, trying not to bump the stranger beside you. His elbow digs into your ribs, and you mutter under your breath, though he doesn't stir. The quilt between you is heavy but thin, patched so often it resembles a mosaic more than a blanket. You trace the seams with your fingers, each stitch a reminder of repairs made after countless cold nights. Historians have long wondered whether those who spent winters in town preferred such crowded beds to the solitude of the frontier. Was the price of restlessness and disease outweighed by the comfort of human voices nearby? Some accounts suggest, yes, miners often returned to boarding houses despite earning enough to rent cabins. Others fled the chaos, preferring silence even if it meant colder nights. You listen to the rise and fall of snores, the muttered words of men lost in dreams, the coughs that shake the rafters. Sleep here is communal, noisy, imperfect, yet as fatigue pulls you deeper, you realize the warmth of bodies, however strange, is enough to carry you through. Outside, the town streets are buried in snow, lanterns flickering weakly in the wind. Inside, the boarding house breathes as one dozens of restless lungs, dozens of weary hearts, each seeking the same fragile comfort of rest in the wild west winter. And as you close your eyes, elbowed and jostled, you surrender to that shared rhythm, drifting into slumber among strangers who are, for this night at least, companions in survival. The night in the boarding house grows heavier, and you begin to notice another rhythm beneath the snores and coughs, the flicker of light, steady yet fragile, struggling against the dark. Long before electricity hummed through towns, the frontier relied on flame to soften winter nights. Candles made of tallow, oil lamps fueled by whale oil or kerosene, even wicks floated in shallow bowls of fat. All of them cast their weak glow across plank walls and rough quilts. It's well recorded in travelers' accounts that darkness on the frontier was absolute, and so even a single flame felt like company, a talisman against the vast night pressing at the windows. You squint through the dim haze, the lamp sputtering at the far end of the room. The flame wavers, sometimes leaning sideways when a draft sneaks through the wall. Its glow pools around the nearest beds, leaving the rest in shadow, faces half hidden, eyes glinting now and then like embers. You realize how much the human mind craved this faint illumination, not only for safety, but for the reassurance that the world had not entirely vanished into black. One curious detail comes from diaries that mention families cutting candle wicks deliberately short, forcing them to gutter and spark. Children would watch in fascination, lulled to sleep by the flames' dance. Some households also placed candles in front of or against polished tin to double the light. The reflected glow turned one flame into two, two into four, a humble magic trick stretching resources farther than reality allowed. Scholars continue to debate how common whale oil or kerosene truly was in isolated regions. Some argue that only wealthier settlers could afford imported fuel, while poorer households relied almost entirely on homemade tallow candles. Others point to shipping records suggesting that barrels of kerosene reached even remote territories by the late 1860s. Whatever the truth, most frontier families treated light as a precious commodity, hoarded and rationed like food. You imagine yourself holding such a candle, the smell of animal fat thick in your nostrils, wax dripping slowly onto a pewter saucer. The flame sputters, bending as if about to fail, and you instinctively shield it with your hand. Around you the boarding house sleeps in uneasy rhythms, but you are caught in the hypnotic pull of that fragile glow. It is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it keeps the dark at bay, terrifying because you know how easily it could vanish. Oddly enough, some towns enforced lamp hours, requiring all lights to be doused at a certain time to reduce fire hazards. Boarding housekeepers walked from room to room, snuffing out flames, while boarders grumbled at being left in total dark. Others ignored such rules, preferring the risk of fire to the certainty of blindness. After all, many feared the dark itself as much as wolves or cold, believing it was a realm where spirits roamed and accidents multiplied. The smell of kerosene is sharp, metallic, lingering on your hands after you touch the lamp. Smoke from tallow candles is harsher still, coating walls with soot, staining quilts that hang too close. You cough softly, and the flame trembles as though your breath alone might extinguish it. In that moment you realize how fragile life itself feels balanced on a wick, flickering, always one gust away from nothing. You stretch, turning onto your side, and watch the shadows lengthen across the ceiling. Shapes loom and shrink, transformed by the shifting flame. A hat on a peg becomes a face, the corner stove a hunched figure. Children often whispered that these shadows were guardians, while adults knew they were simply tricks of light. Still, the imagination thrives on darkness, and dreams are easily seeded by silhouettes dancing against rough boards. Historians note that some frontier households adopted rituals of light before sleep, placing a candle by the bed to read a psalm, or leaving a lamp lit low for the sick. The glow became symbolic as well as practical, a small ceremony that promised the family would rise again at dawn. To snuff out the last light too quickly felt ominous, like inviting the wilderness inside. You close your eyes, the flicker still painting orange patterns against your eyelids. The smell of smoke lingers, the quiet of the room deepens, and at last someone snuffs the lamp. The hiss is soft but final, plunging the boarding house into thick, swallowing black. At first it feels suffocating. You can't see the faces beside you, can't even see your own hand raised before your eyes. But gradually the darkness softens, your ears tune to the breathing around you, and your body lets go. Sleep, you realize, was always an act of trust in the frontier night. Trust in fire to keep you alive, trust in walls to hold, and trust in the tiny flame of a lamp to grant enough peace to surrender to dreams. Now, with even that gone, you surrender, drifting into blackness as deep as the prairie sky. The blackness feels endless, but not everyone faced it in quite the same way. When you open your eyes again, you picture yourself not in a boarding house or a drafty log cabin, but within a circular lodge, its frame of bent poles covered in hides, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and sage. Indigenous communities across the West had their own traditions for enduring winter nights, and their methods often proved far more effective than those of settlers. Ethnographers have recorded that many tribes designed their shelters with winter in mind, conical teepees or earth lodges engineered to hold warmth, while allowing smoke to escape. For countless generations, people had already mastered the art of sleeping through brutal winters long before wagons ever rolled westward. The fire at the center of a teepee or lodge was small but carefully managed, smoke drawn upward through a vent. The design allowed heat to spread evenly, creating a space where families could sleep around the circle, heads toward the fire, feet outward. It's well recorded that buffalo hides served not only as blankets, but also as coverings for the structure itself, layered thickly enough to trap warmth. Inside, the glow of the flames painted the hides with soft colors, turning the interior into a place of warmth, even as blizzards howled outside. One curious detail is how some plains tribes lined there with cedar boughs, releasing a sharp, pleasant scent that masked smoke and gave a cushion against the frozen ground. Others used furs layered so deeply that children disappeared entirely beneath them, their laughter muffled before sleep claimed them. In some communities, storytelling accompanied this ritual of bedding down, elders' voices weaving myths as blankets were adjusted and fire embers stirred. Sleep was not only about survival, it was also a sacred time, guarded by stories and ritual. Scholars remain divided on how much influence indigenous winter traditions had on settlers. Some argue that pioneers borrowed heavily copying methods of layering hides, insulating shelters, and even arranging sleepers in circles. Others contend settlers often dismissed native practices, clinging to European customs even when they proved impractical in the West. The truth is likely somewhere in between, with necessity forcing imitation in quiet, unacknowledged ways. You can almost feel yourself lying on those cedar boughs now, the scent sharp in your nostrils, the warmth of fur pressed close. The crackle of the central fire is softer than a cabin hearth, controlled carefully so sparks do not fly. Around you the air hums with breathing, children sighing in their sleep, elders shifting slowly. Outside the storm may rage, but inside the circle you feel contained, sheltered not only by hides but by generations of knowledge. Oddly enough, some reports describe how snow itself was used deliberately in construction. Certain tribes in the far north packed snow against the base of their lodges, just as settlers later would against cabins. The practice wasn't seen as strange but as obvious, a natural extension of living with the land. Where settlers often cursed the cold, native traditions worked with it, turning even snow into an ally. The sounds of the night are different here too. Instead of creaking timbers and rattling windows, you hear the steady hiss of wind against hide walls, like waves against a shore. The fire breathes gently, its smoke trailing upward, leaving only a faint tang in the air. Shadows move in curves instead of angles, shapes bending across the rounded walls. It feels less like a room and more like a womb, a place of safety carved against the wilderness. Historians sometimes muse that sleep in indigenous lodges may have been more restful than in settler cabins, not because conditions were easy but because they were expected. The design, the rituals, the communal closeness all reinforced a rhythm that had been honed for centuries. Where settlers improvised with straw ticks and cracked logs, native families slept in structures deliberately crafted for endurance. You shift beneath the imagined weight of furs, and the difference is clear. Here, warmth is not piecemeal but enveloping. The cedar, the hides, the careful fire all combine into an embrace that feels more natural than anything a hurried settler might build. For a moment, you almost envy the children drifting to sleep, their dreams shaped not by fear of wolves or drafts, but by stories of spirits guiding the night. And as your eyelids grow heavy once more, you realize that winter sleep on the frontier was never one story. It was a tapestry of traditions, of borrowed methods and clashing customs, of wisdom sometimes ignored and sometimes embraced. In the indigenous lodge, you feel the difference keenly, not merely surviving the cold but belonging within it, resting in harmony with forces that settlers so often fought. The fire hums, the hides rustle faintly, and you let yourself drift, cocooned in warmth older than any cabin wall. The calm of the lodge fades, and you wake again to the roar of something far more violent. Outside, the wind shrieks like 1,000 voices, rattling whatever walls contain you now. Snow slams against the roof in waves, drumming so hard it feels like the sky itself is falling. You realize you are inside a cabin once more, but this time you are not merely sleeping through winter, you are trapped by it. Contemporary records describe blizzards that sealed families indoors for days, even weeks, burying doors, windows, and chimneys until escape was impossible. The air inside grows heavy, smoky, as the storm tightens its grip. Firewood dwindles quickly. Every log burned is another step closer to scarcity. The family huddles together, quilts piled to the ceiling, children squirming restlessly. It's well recorded that some households played games or told stories to distract themselves from the claustrophobia, while others simply endured in silence, each hour stretching longer than the last. One curious account from the Dakotas recalls a family who resorted to melting snow inside for drinking water after their well froze solid. They set pots by the fire, waiting as the storm's bounty dripped into liquid, while outside the wind howled so fiercely that even voices couldn't be heard. Another story tells of neighbors tunneling between cabins, carving narrow passages through drifts just wide enough to crawl, so they might share food or news without braving the open air. Scholars still disagree about the psychological toll these confinements exacted. Some argue that families grew closer, forced into intimacy that strengthened bonds. Others suggest tempers flared, arguments ignited, and despair crept in as the days blurred together. Whatever the case, blizzards were more than weather, they were imprisonments, cages built of snow. You pull the hide tighter, feeling the weight of stillness press down. Outside the storm roars, but inside the noise is muffled, replaced by the sounds of restless humans. Someone coughs, someone whispers a prayer, someone shifts straw to find a softer patch. The smell of smoke is sharp, almost choking, as the chimney struggles to draw. More than one family lost lives this way, suffocated by their own fires when the snow sealed every vent. Oddly enough, some children remembered such confinements fondly. They described them later as snow days, times when work paused, chores lessened, and stories filled the long dark. They played games with carved wooden animals, sang songs, or listened wide-eyed as elders recited tales. For young ones, the storm outside was just a backdrop to rare, uninterrupted attention from parents otherwise consumed by survival. You, though, feel the tension. Each time the wind slams the roof, you wonder if it will hold. Each log you place on the fire makes you count how few remain. Hunger gnaws as food supplies shrink, each meal stretched thinner. A pot of thin gruel simmers on the hearth. The smell faint, almost mocking. Your belly rumbles, but you eat slowly, pretending the portion is enough. Historians note that during some of the harshest winters, families spoke of time-warping days indistinguishable from nights, sleep broken by constant watchfulness, dreams blurred with waking fears. Imagine lying down, drifting into uneasy rest, only to wake certain that days have passed when it has only been hours. The storm outside steals not just freedom of movement but clarity of thought. You curl into the straw, ears tuned to the muffled violence beyond. Snow presses tighter against the walls, sealing every gap until the cabin feels buried alive. And yet, strangely, warmth lingers longer this way. The storm itself becomes a blanket, trapping what little heat the fire provides. Survival here is paradoxical. The same snow that imprisons also protects. The children finally settle, their breathing steady, their small bodies radiating heat. You tuck the quilt higher, trying not to think of the dwindling woodpile, the hunger gnawing deeper. You close your eyes, letting the storm's roar become a lullaby, a reminder that while the wilderness rages, you are still here, still sheltered. And in that fragile space between fear and sleep, you understand what it meant to live through a frontier blizzard, to surrender control, to endure confinement, to measure time not in hours but in breaths, shared beneath heavy quilts, waiting for the world outside to soften again. The storm has passed, but the house still murmurs with its own strange voice. You lie awake and listen. The wind outside has quieted, yet the cabin itself continues to speak, a chorus of groans, cracks and sighs, as though the very logs are restless sleepers sharing your night. Travelers' journals often mention how unnerving this could be. It's well recorded that freshly cut timber, stacked quickly into walls, shrank and shifted for years, making sharp reports like gunshots in the silence of winter nights. You close your eyes and let the sounds wash over you. One log pops like a knuckle, another creaks with a long, low moan. The roof timbers shift under the weight of snow, their joints squealing faintly. Sometimes the noise is sudden and startling, jerking you half upright. Other times it is soft and rhythmic, like the cabin itself is breathing. A curious observation comes from one pioneer boy who swore the logs talked to each other at night. He claimed they whispered in the cracks, conspiring to collapse when least expected. His parents laughed, but he refused to sleep near the walls after dark. Another account describes families naming the loudest groans Old Henry, for one particularly dramatic beam, so the noises became familiar, less frightening. Specialists remain divided on whether these sounds provided comfort or unease. Some argue that they reassured sleepers, proof the structure was holding steady against wind and snow. Others suggest they were constant reminders of fragility, each creak a warning that collapse might be near. Both perspectives ring true depending on the night. You run your hand along the wall beside you. It feels cool, slightly damp, and alive with vibration when the logs shift. You imagine yourself not in a solid house, but in a giant wooden ship riding the tides of winter storms. Every sound is the hull groaning against unseen waves. Perhaps that's why dreams here often carried people to the sea, even if they had never seen it, because their cabins sang the same songs as ships. Oddly enough, some settlers deliberately loosened joints to let timbers move freely, believing it reduced the chance of splitting. Others stuffed moss and rags tighter into the cracks, hoping to muffle the sound as well as drafts. Neither method silenced the house completely. At best, the noises grew gentler, at worst sharper. The smell of resin hangs in the air, fresh sap still weeping from logs cut too green. Each time the cabin pops, a faint sweetness rises, mingling with smoke from the hearth. You breathe it in, realizing how all the senses are enlisted in survival here. The ear attuned to cracks, the nose to smoke, the skin to drafts. Sleep depends on learning which sensations mean danger and which can be ignored. Historians sometimes wonder how much these nightly sounds shaped the psychology of frontier life. Did constant creaks and groans instill anxiety, making people wary, even in their rest? Or did they become background noise, so familiar that silence itself felt unsettling? There's no definitive answer, only fragments from diaries, some fearful, some amused, all acknowledging that the house was never truly quiet. You pull the quilt higher and roll onto your side. The cabin moans again, followed by a long pause, as if it too is settling into slumber. You smile faintly, accepting the noise as part of the night. Perhaps it is better this way, to sleep in a house that speaks, than to lie in silence, wondering what might lurk outside. Gradually the creaks fade into your dreams, woven into the fabric of sleep itself. The house breathes, you breathe, and together you endure the long cold hours until dawn. The cabin is quieter now, its groans settling into softer sighs, but another rhythm has taken its place. It's not the wind or the timbers, it's the low murmur of voices near the fire. You turn your head and see two figures seated close together, their faces lit in amber glow. The way they lean toward each other tells a story as old as winter. When nights are long and cold, People reach for warmth not only in quilts, but in companionship. Diaries from the frontier often mention that harsh winters became seasons of courtship. With work slowed and nights endless, young couples found themselves drawn together by firelight. You watch them quietly, seeing how the flames paint shadows across their cheeks, how hands brush when logs are passed, how laughter punctuates the silence. It's well documented that in small communities, winter gatherings, quilting bees, church socials, or simply shared firesides often led to new engagements by spring. What else could people do when snow confined them? Conversation became the great pastime, and in its folds romance often bloomed. One curious account comes from a woman who admitted she fell in love between stitches while sewing quilts with neighbors through a storm. She remembered the young man who teased her about crooked seams, only to bring her hot cider later as an apology. Another described how young couples courted by sharing watch duty at night, sitting together while tending the fire, speaking softly so as not to wake the household. The cold made closeness both practical and irresistible. Experts are still divided on how much of this intimacy was born from choice and how much from circumstance. Did winter truly kindle deeper bonds, or did confinement simply leave few alternatives? Some historians argue that isolation amplified every interaction, turning glances into promises. Others suggest romance was inevitable regardless, only more visible when snow pressed people into tighter quarters. You shift beneath your covers, imagining yourself in that circle of firelight. The warmth on your face, the hum of voices, the occasional brush of hands, it feels like a reprieve from the relentless struggle of survival. Outside, wolves may howl and the wind may batter the cabin, but here, in this fragile bubble of warmth, hearts beat louder than storms. Oddly enough, some families even encouraged winter courtship, knowing that with little work to be done, young people might as well use the season to forge new ties. Parents pretended to sleep while keeping one ear open, aware that whispered promises by the fire might shape the next spring wedding. Others, stricter in their beliefs, separated couples firmly, insisting that darkness was no excuse for impropriety. Yet even in stern households, the fire itself seemed to conspire, casting everything in a glow that softened edges and shortened distances. The smell of cider or coffee often lingered in these moments, sweet steam rising to mingle with smoke. Quilts might be shared, chairs drawn closer, and the hush of night broken not by fear but by gentle laughter. You realize that sleep, for some, came later than usual on such nights, delayed by stories, songs, or the thrill of stolen touches. Historians sometimes point out that many frontier marriages began in winter months, proof that courtship truly thrived when snow confined communities. It's tempting to think of love as another survival strategy, emotional warmth balancing physical cold. Perhaps it was both necessity and desire, twined together like hands before the hearth. You let your eyes close, hearing the soft murmur of conversation fade into the rhythm of the fire. Even as you drift, you carry the image with you, two figures leaning close, their laughter rising above the crackle of wood, a reminder that even in the harshest seasons, humanity seeks not just survival but connection. And so, while sleep slowly returns, you understand that winter nights on the frontier were not only about enduring cold, they were also about finding warmth in each other, weaving bonds as strong as quilts, as enduring as log walls. Love, after all, can be as much a shelter as any cabin. The fire burns low again, its glow muted, and in that quiet you hear another sound, the faint scurry of tiny feet. At first you think it's your imagination, the echo of your own restless shifting, but then you feel it a quick dart across the straw tick, light as a whisper. You freeze, holding your breath, and the movement stops. Life in the Wild West winter did not belong only to humans. Rodents, insects, and other small creatures often shared the night, drawn to the same warmth and shelter you clung to. Letters and diaries make it clear. Frontier cabins were never empty, no matter how carefully swept or sealed. You tilt your head slightly, listening harder. In the darkness, the faint gnawing at a timber corner becomes audible. It's well documented that mice chewed constantly through cabins, searching for crumbs or for nesting materials to line their own tiny beds. The sound is irritating, yes, but it's also oddly familiar, a reminder that every creature is at war with the cold, all of you seeking scraps of survival in the same space. One curious account tells of a settler girl who swore she woke to find a mouse curled asleep in her slipper by the hearth. Instead of fear, she felt pity, covering the slipper with a cloth so the creature could finish its rest. Another diary, less charitable, describes mornings when straw mattresses had to be beaten outside because mice had tunneled into them during the night. Families often resign themselves to this cohabitation, joking bitterly that the cold makes us all kin. Experts remain divided on how much of a threat these intruders posed. Some argue that vermin spread disease and spoiled precious stores, making winters deadlier. Others note that the presence of mice or rats often kept cabins marginally safer from larger predators, since their constant scurrying made noise that warned of intrusion. In either case, their existence was unavoidable. You shift slightly, and the straw beneath you rustles. The scent of dried hay rises, mingled with smoke and the faint musk of animal fur. Something darts again near your leg, and you shiver not just from the cold, but from the intimacy of sharing your bed with the wild. The thought unsettles you, yet in some strange way you realize you're not alone. The rodents, too, are refugees from the brutal night, seeking warmth in the same fragile shelter. Oddly enough, cabins weren't the only places where unexpected guests appeared. Barns and lean-tos often became winter havens for snakes, bats, and insects seeking warmth. Some farmers even welcomed cats not as pets, but as necessary guardians against the tide of tiny intruders. A good Mauser meant fewer chewed quilts, fewer ruined sacks of grain, and quieter nights. Children sometimes named the cat's night watch, a title that fit as well as any humans. The noises continue, a faint squeak, a scurry along the rafters, the soft thump of something small dropping into a pile of straw. You sigh, pulling the quilt higher, trying to block out the reminders that your rest is never fully yours. Historians sometimes suggest that this uneasy coexistence contributed to a restless kind of sleep on the frontier. People could not fully let go, always half attuned to rustling that might signal vermin or might, in darker fears, be something larger outside. The fire pops softly, casting enough glow to reveal a mouse darting across the floor, pausing near the hearth. Its tiny body shivers, steam rising faintly from its breath. For a moment you almost admire its determination. It has carved its place in this night as surely as you have. Survival is not elegant, not tidy. It is messy, shared, and unavoidable. You close your eyes again, trying to fold the sound into the rhythm of the night. The cabin creaks, the fire sighs, the mice scurry, all part of the same chorus. You realize that here even the smallest creatures become part of your story, woven into the fragile fabric of winter sleep. They are not welcome, not really, but neither can they be excluded. So you turn on your side, pull the hide tighter, and let the rustling fade into the background. In the Wild West, warmth is a common currency, and tonight it is shared by all humans, rodents, and every other soul desperate enough to seek shelter in the dark. The mouse finally disappears into the shadows, leaving only the low hum of voices filtering in from another building down the frozen street. You stir, half awake, and realize you are no longer in a cabin but in a larger space, its air thick with warmth and the mingled scent of wool, smoke, and candle wax. You've been led into a church or meeting hall, the kind that doubled as gathering place for entire communities during the coldest months. It's well recorded in frontier accounts that when storms grew harsh or homes felt too fragile, neighbors often congregated in communal spaces, drawing comfort not only from shared fire but from shared presence. The bench is a rough-hewn, the floor covered in straw to soften the chill, but the heat here is different. Dozens of bodies radiate warmth, layered quilts and cloaks overlapping until the hall becomes its own quilt of human presence. You can feel the comfort instantly. Sleep in such a place is not solitary or even strictly familial. It is communal, a surrender to rest amid neighbors who would normally keep their distance. One curious description comes from a minister's diary, noting that families slept through sermons during the longest winters, grateful simply for the excuse to stay near the stove. Better a snore in God's house than frost in one's own, he wrote with dry humor. In some towns, people even took turns maintaining fires in church stoves, ensuring that anyone needing refuge could step inside day or night. Specialists still debate how much these gatherings were practical necessity and how much they were psychological relief. Some argue that they prevented deaths, offering shelter to those in flimsy cabins. Others suggest the deeper value lay in breaking the isolation of winter, staving off despair as effectively as cold. Whatever the reason, churches and halls became lifelines, not just spiritually but physically. You stretch across a bench, the hardwood pressing into your side, yet you find comfort in the murmur of voices around you. A child whimpers, hushed quickly. Someone snores gently in the back pews. The stove pops with expanding iron, filling the hall with a sharp metallic scent. The soundscape is busier than your cabin nights, yet somehow gentler, the noise of life persisting in the dark. Oddly enough, some of these gatherings turned festive. Communities held winter watch nights, staying together until dawn, singing hymns or folk songs, telling stories while the wind screamed outside. Sleep came in fragments, stolen between verses or during lulls in conversation. For children, it was both exciting and exhausting, a memory etched deep into their winters. Adults, though, found reassurance in such nights. Knowing that the whole town endured together lightened the burden, even if only for a while. The air grows heavy with smoke as another log is shoved into the stove. You cough softly, eyes watering, but no one seems to mind. The warmth is worth the sting, the safety worth the discomfort. You pull a borrowed quilt higher and let yourself sink into the strange intimacy of sleeping in a room filled with voices and strangers. Historians sometimes ask whether such communal resting spaces blurred boundaries between sacred and mundane. Did people feel shame at turning churches into dormitories? or did necessity sanctify even sleep? Evidence suggests little guilt. Frontier life was too harsh for rigid divisions. The church was not only a place for prayer but also for survival, and in that dual role it became even more central to community life. You close your eyes, the rough bench beneath you strangely bearable now, the voices a lullaby of human endurance. Outside the snow continues, but inside the warmth of many lives pressed together makes the night survivable. Sleep here is not private, but it is peaceful, and you surrender to it willingly. The murmur of voices in the church hall fades, and you slip into another kind of night, one shaped not by silence but by stories. Imagine the scene, quilts pulled high, firelight flickering against the walls, and someone's voice rising gently above the creaks and sighs of the cabin. It's well documented that frontier families relied heavily on oral tradition during long winters. Books were rare, candles costly, and so stories became the entertainment, the education, and the lullabies that carried people towards sleep. You can almost hear it now, a father recounting a hunting tale, his voice low and steady, while children burrow deeper into their straw ticks, or perhaps a mother singing an old song, her words soft as wool, weaving melody into the smoky air. The cadence of these sounds was as important as their content, for rhythm itself had power to calm restless bodies. One curious recollection comes from a settler boy who remembered his grandmother telling stories of Europe, castles, and forests so unlike the prairie while snow rattled the shutters. He admitted later that he believed in those castles more firmly than in the frozen cornfield outside. Another account describes children learning Bible verses by firelight, not for sermons, but because reciting them gave their tongues something to do while their fingers stiffened with cold. Experts remain divided on how much storytelling was practical distraction and how much was cultural preservation. Some argue that it was simply a way to pass time when darkness swallowed the day. Others point out that these tales carried identity, keeping alive traditions that might otherwise vanish in the harshness of migration. Either way, they became nightly companions, shaping the dreams of generations. The sound of a fiddle sometimes joined the voices. Not every family owned one, but where a violin, banjo, or harmonica could be found, music filled the night. It was never concert hall quality. Strings snapped, notes wavered, but the tunes echoed with warmth nonetheless. Lullabies drifted over straw beds, and even adults found comfort in the familiar strains. Imagine lying half asleep, listening to Home Sweet Home played on a battered fiddle while snow pressed against the walls. Oddly enough, some of these tales and songs doubled as cautionary lessons. Parents warned children not to wander into drifts by telling stories of spirits who snatched the careless. Songs reminded listeners of chores or moral lessons, hidden beneath melody. In this way, entertainment carried instruction, ensuring survival through story as much as through quilts. The smell of smoke thickens as another log is added, sparks flying, shadows leap, and the story continues, weaving seamlessly with the room's textures. You hear the crack of wood, the hiss of sap, the soft chuckle of children at a funny line. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled less by the plot than by the cadence, the steady hum of human voice in the cold. Historians sometimes argue that the oral culture of the frontier shaped American memory more than texts did. After all, many who lived and died on those plains left no journals, no letters, only the stories their children repeated. Sleep itself became entwined with these traditions, for every tale ended the same way, with eyes closing, bodies relaxing, and dreams stepping in to finish what words began. You nestle deeper into the hides, feeling the warmth of others close, and surrender to the rhythm of story. The voice becomes softer, the song slower, until it fades into the hush of breathing. And as you drift, you realize that these tales weren't just distractions from the cold. They were survival themselves, weaving warmth where fire and quilts alone could not reach. The last story drifts into silence, and you find yourself awake again in the middle of the night. The fire has sunk low, embers glowing faintly, and the cabin is thick with cold. But you notice something peculiar. No one seems surprised by this break in sleep. People stir, rise to tend the fire, or whisper softly before settling down again. Travelers' notes and letters often describe nights divided into two distinct phases, what some later scholars call first sleep and second sleep. It's well recorded in European and early American history that segmented sleep was once common, and evidence suggests frontier families followed a similar rhythm, especially in winter. You imagine lying awake after first sleep, the hours before midnight spent in heavy slumber. Around you, others shift, some rising to use the chamber pot, some padding quietly to the hearth to check the fire. The room hums with low activity, not unlike dawn, yet everyone knows they will return to bed soon. In these middle hours, conversation flows softly, plans for the next day, whispered confessions, even prayers murmured in the half-dark. It is a strange liminal time, neither fully night nor day. One curious account comes from a settler who remembered her parents reading the Bible aloud during this interval. Children gathered groggily around as though it were a second evening. Another diary mentions neighbors visiting during the night, trudging across snowy fields to share news while everyone was between sleeps. Seems odd now, but to them the break was natural, even expected. Historians still disagree on whether this two-sleep pattern truly persisted in the frontier era or if it faded earlier with the spread of industrial schedules. Some argue that in places without strict work clocks, people continued to follow natural rhythms, sleeping in two shifts with a period of wakefulness in between. Others believe that frontier exhaustion made segmented sleep less likely. Families fell into bed and stayed until morning simply because their bodies demanded it. The truth may lie somewhere in between, varying by household and season. You stir in your straw tick, experiencing this wakeful pause yourself. The fire's glow flickers against the walls, the room faintly lit, enough to see others moving quietly. A mother rocks a child who woke hungry, feeding them a bit of bread saved from supper. A father sharpens a tool by the firelight, making use of the unexpected hours. The smell of smoke is thicker now, mingled with the faint tang of steel striking stone. The air feels different, still night, yet busy, alive. Oddly enough, some people even cherish this interval as private time. A trapper described how he used the hours between sleeps to mend gear or reflect in solitude, calling it my thinking watch. For women, it might be a chance to stitch by lamplight or to talk quietly with sisters or daughters. The world outside remained locked in winter's grip, but inside, this mid-sleep vigil created space for tasks and thoughts otherwise lost to daylight labor. You settle again, drawing quilts higher, and notice how naturally the body accepts the rhythm. Sleep comes in waves, not as a single unbroken stretch. You may lie awake for an hour, but fatigue eventually pulls you back, leading to a second, deeper slumber until dawn. Perhaps this explains the vividness of dreams settlers so often recorded, dreams that seem to bridge both halves of the night, carrying stories across wakefulness. Historians sometimes wonder whether this older pattern might have been healthier than our modern expectation of one long sleep. Did it allow people to process dreams more vividly? Did it give them respite from the monotony of endless nights? No one can say for sure, but the records hint that people did not resent it. It was simply the rhythm of winter life. You exhale slowly, letting your body loosen again. The fire hums softly. The cabin creaks and voices fade into whispers. Soon the hush deepens once more, and everyone sinks into second sleep, carrying the fragments of conversation and thought into dreams. You, too, close your eyes, surrendering to this ancient rhythm, letting the long night divide itself naturally, like a river splitting around an island, before merging again at dawn. The second sleep takes hold, yet even as your eyes close, another sound pulls you halfway awake. It isn't voices, nor the groan of the logs. This is softer, more constant. You listen and realize it's the wind, not howling like a storm but whispering, brushing snowflakes across the cabin walls. It becomes a lullaby of sorts, a rhythm that seeps into your bones. Contemporary observers often noted how winter nights carried their own music. For those who lived through them, the hiss of snow and the sigh of wind were as familiar as any cradle song. You picture yourself lying still, the quilt heavy, the straw prickling faintly beneath. Outside, the snow falls in sheets, muffling the world until it feels dreamlike. It's well recorded that settlers sometimes described the quiet after a snowfall as sacred, a silence so deep that even a cough sounded like thunder. In that hush, the faintest sounds became lullabies, the whistle of wind through chinks, the flutter of snow shaken from the roof, the creak of rafters settling underweight. One curious story tells of a family who claimed they could tell the weather by the tone of the wind at night. A low hum meant a clear dawn, while a high-pitched whistle warned of storms to come. Children grew up believing the wind itself was a prophet, whispering secrets through the cracks. Some even pressed their ears to the walls, listening as though the cabin were a giant instrument. Experts still debate whether these soundscapes made sleep easier or harder. Some argue that the monotony of wind and snow soothed restless minds, much like white noise today. Others insist it heightened anxiety, reminding families of their vulnerability. Was the snow pressing gently against the cabin as protection, or piling dangerously high, threatening collapse? The same sound carried both comfort and warning. You close your eyes and let the noises surround you. The wind rises, a long exhale across the prairie. Snowflakes patter faintly against the window covering, a soft tapping like fingertips. Now and then a chunk of snow slides from the roof, landing with a muffled thud that makes you start before relaxing again. Each sound folds into the rhythm of your breathing until you cannot tell whether you're hearing the storm or your own heartbeat. Oddly enough, some settlers remembered these nights of sound more fondly than anything else. A woman later wrote that, "I slept best when the wind sang loud, for then I knew we were not alone." The idea that the wilderness had a voice soothing, unending, gave her comfort. For others, the memory of snow's muffled hush was the closest thing to peace they knew. The smell of the cabin drifts into your awareness. Smoke from the banked fire, damp wool, the faint sweetness of drying apples stored in sacks overhead. All of it mixes with the quiet symphony outside, making the night thick with sensation. You shift slightly, quilt rustling, and the noise seems to blend perfectly into the soundscape, another layer of rhythm in the lullaby of winter. Historians sometimes remark that frontier children grew up attuned to these nocturnal songs. To them, the moan of wind, the patter of snow, the occasional owl call were not disturbances but normal companions. Silence, in fact, could feel eerie, an unnatural stillness that suggested danger. Better the constant whisper of snow than the dead hush of waiting predators. You sigh, relaxing as the wind carries its song across the cabin. Your body loosens, eyes heavy once more, lulled not by comfort but by familiarity. The Wild West winter was harsh, but in its voice you hear a strange tenderness, as though the land itself were humming you to sleep. So you surrender again, letting the lullaby of wind and snow fold you deeper into the long night. Tomorrow may bring storms or sunshine, hunger or plenty, but tonight the world outside sings, and you listen until dreams take you fully. You wake once more, though this time not from noise but from an unsettled feeling inside your chest. Your body has endured weeks of broken nights, and the fatigue weighs heavier than the quilts. On the frontier, sleeplessness was not simply inconvenient, it was dangerous. Letters and journals reveal how cold, hunger, and fear gnawed at people's rest, leaving them irritable and worn thin. It's well recorded that frontier physicians often blamed the nervous fevers of winter on the mind's inability to settle in such conditions. Sleep deprivation was as much an adversary as frostbite. You shift, straw crunching beneath you, and your joints ache with every move. Exhaustion is more than physical, it creeps into thought, sharpening tempers, making even small tasks feel impossible. A father might snap at his children for rustling too loudly. A mother might scold when quilts slip. Siblings might bicker until silence returns. The psychological toll of sleepless nights stretched far beyond the cabin walls. It seeped into relationships, into decisions, into the very will to push through another day. One curious detail comes from a settler's letter describing cabin fever, that mix of sleeplessness and confinement that drove families to argue endlessly. "We quarreled more in those weeks," she admitted, "than in all our years together." Others confessed to walking outside in bitter cold, simply to escape the press of walls and voices, risking frostbite for a few breaths of solitude. Experts remain divided on whether sleeplessness was more damaging than physical cold itself. Some argue that fatigue weakened immune systems, inviting illness. Others suggest that irritability and poor judgment, born of unrest minds, led to accidents far more dangerous than drafts or vermin. The debate lingers, but all agree, exhaustion shaped the rhythm of frontier winters. You stretch beneath the quilt, staring at the rafters frosted white. Your mind won't quiet. You think of dwindling firewood, of howling wolves, of neighbors you haven't seen in weeks. The thoughts circle endlessly, each one sparking another, until sleep feels impossible. Perhaps you're not alone in this restlessness. Around you, others stir, muttering, coughing, sighing heavily. The cabin breathes uneasily, filled with bodies awake when they should be dreaming. Oddly enough, some families turn to rituals meant to calm unsettled minds. Herbal teas brewed from chamomile or sage, prayers repeated until voices softened, even lullabies hummed for adults as well as children. In one account, A woman described her husband whittling late into the night. The steady scrape of knife on would soothing both of them, until slumber finally came. Another family relied on psalm singing, their voices rising softly in the darkness until drowsiness won. The smell of smoke is stronger now, for the fire has been fed again, and the cabin holds more heat, yet warmth alone cannot guarantee rest. Your body longs to sink, but your mind remains alert, pulled taut by unseen tension. Historians sometimes muse that this constant wakefulness was a kind of survival mechanism, better to lie half-aware than fully vulnerable in a world where dangers never slept. But the cost of such vigilance was steep. You roll onto your side facing the wall, hoping the rough logs will distract you. The creaks of timber are softer now, almost like a lullaby. Your breathing slows, yet your thoughts still churn. This is the toll of winter sleep on the frontier. Never quite whole, never quite enough. You drift for moments, wake again, drift once more. It is a patchwork rest, stitched together with sheer will. And yet, somehow, people endured. They rose each morning to cut wood, feed stock, mend fences, and push through snow, no matter how restless the night had been. Sleep may have been fragile, but resilience was stubborn. You close your eyes and try again, letting the hum of the wind and the sigh of the fire ease your mind, if not fully silence it. In this uneasy rhythm, you drift not deeply, not peacefully, but enough. And perhaps that was all the Wild West ever demanded. Not perfect rest, but survival, carried through by sheer determination against the long, sleepless dark. The cabin is heavy with exhaustion, every breath a rasp, everybody sunk into quilts that feel less like comfort and more like shields. But there is another layer of night here. Not fear of wolves or creaking logs, not sleeplessness alone, but the presence of death itself. Frontier winters did not spare the weak, and many journals speak of long nights spent not in slumber, but in mourning. It's well recorded that pneumonia, influenza, and sheer cold claimed lives suddenly, and families had little choice but to face loss in the middle of winter darkness. You can almost feel the weight of it now, the room hushed, fire glowing faintly, a stillness deeper than sleep hanging over one corner of the cabin. Someone has slipped away during the night, breath fading quietly until there was none left. For those who remained, there was no time for grief in daylight. Death came at all hours, and the rituals of mourning often began before dawn. One haunting account tells of a family who kept vigil through the night beside a child's still body, afraid to place it outside in the cold. They sat wrapped in quilts, telling stories not to the child but to themselves, as though words might stitch the world back together. Another settler wrote of neighbors carrying a body to a barn because the ground was too frozen for burial, promising to lay it properly when spring softened the earth. Death, like sleep, had to be postponed, managed in fragments. Scholars remain divided on how families coped emotionally with these winter losses. Some argue that constant exposure to death hardened people, making grief practical rather than overwhelming. Others believe the nights amplified sorrow, leaving scars that lingered long after spring thawed. The evidence is mixed, but all accounts agree. Winter turned mourning into endurance as much as survival itself. You picture yourself awake in such a night, the fire's glow flickering on still faces, the silence broken only by muffled sobs or whispered prayers. The smell of smoke mixes with the raw salt of tears, with the musty scent of quilts pulled tighter, not only for warmth but for comfort. The air feels unbearably heavy, as though grief itself has weight pressing on your chest. Oddly enough, some communities developed rituals unique to winter loss. Families would light extra candles, letting them burn through the night as guides for the departed. Children were sometimes told the wind outside was the voice of loved ones carried to the beyond, a way to soften the blow of absence. In a few regions, neighbors gathered in the dead of night to sing hymns quietly at the cabin door, their voices mingling with the storm as a gesture of solidarity. You shift beneath your covers, heart tightening at the thought of sleep in such circumstances. Could rest ever truly come when grief was so near? And yet, fatigue always won eventually. Diaries describe families collapsing into restless slumber, even while sitting beside the departed, their bodies too exhausted to resist. Grief and sleep overlapped, dreams blurring with memories until morning brought the painful reminder that it had not been a nightmare after all. Historians sometimes muse that frontier nights taught people to live with death as part of the household, not as a distant intruder. Children grew up understanding mortality in ways that shock modern minds. Sleep, in that context, became practice for surrender, each night a small rehearsal for the final silence. You breathe deeply, the air of the cabin thick with sorrow, and close your eyes again. You do not escape grief, but you carry it into dreams, where perhaps voices return, laughter is heard again, and warmth replaces the cold. When you wake, it will not be gone, but at least you will have rested enough to face it. And so you drift once more, wrapped not only in quilts and hides, but in the complicated weight of memory, survival, and love. Lost in the it is remembrance, resilience, and the fragile hope that tomorrow still waits. The night is long, yet finally, after storms and howls, after restless turns and fractured slumber, a dim light begins to press against the cracks in the shutters. Dawn is not warm, it seldom is on the winter prairie, but it brings with it the promise of endurance. You open your eyes, the quilts heavy, your body stiff with cold and fatigue, and you realize you have survived another night. Frontier diaries often mark this transition as triumph, as though each morning were a small victory wrestled from the wilderness itself. The fire has sunk to ash, faintly glowing, and someone is already up to stir it. You hear the scrape of iron against coals, the clatter of wood stacked anew. Smoke curls lazily through the cabin, stinging your eyes, yet even that burn feels like life returning. It's well recorded that mornings after winter, nights were defined not by ease, but by the ritual of rekindling fire, spirits, and bodies alike. The first task was not celebration, but continuation. One curious memory comes from a settler woman who wrote that every dawn in January tasted of ashes and coffee. Ashes from the fire, coffee if there was any to be had, thin and bitter but warm enough to pull her back into the day. Another account recalls children scrambling to dress near the hearth, steam rising from damp clothes as they warmed them against the stove. These mornings were not leisurely. They were orchestrated chaos, survival rearranging itself for daylight. Specialists remain divided on whether people ever truly rested well enough to restore themselves. Some argue that frontier families lived in a perpetual state of fatigue, functioning through sheer necessity rather than genuine recuperation. Others suggest that human adaptability allowed them to thrive on less, that resilience itself became a form of rest. The records reveal both truths. Exhaustion was constant, but so was persistence. You stretch, straw rustling beneath you, and the air feels brittle, as though it might shatter with each breath. Yet the sight of pale light through frosted glass brings a surge of quiet relief. The worst of the night is past. Outside, snow glitters cruelly, but inside, voices stir, children yawning, adults muttering, someone humming softly as they pull on boots. Life is fragile here, but it continues. Oddly enough, some mornings carried a rare gentleness. A child might wake to find the frost on the window etched into delicate patterns, calling them ice flowers. Families sometimes pause to admire the beauty of what nearly destroyed them, tracing the frozen lace with fingers before wiping it clear. Even in hardship, winter offered its small gifts. You rise slowly, wrapping a shawl around your shoulders, and look back at the straw tick, the quilts, the embers. That bed of rustling stalks, itchy hides, and heavy blankets has carried you through. It was never luxury, never comfort as you might imagine it today, but it was survival. And survival, on these long winter nights, was the only currency that mattered. Historians sometimes say that the Wild West was built not in the daylight of saloons and cattle drives, but in the unseen hours of winter nights, families huddled together, fires kept alive, rest stolen in fragments, dreams shaped by hunger and fear. To sleep here was to resist, to wake here was to endure. You breathe deeply, let the smoke sting fade, and allow your body to loosen just a little. Morning has come again, and with it the fragile promise that tonight, too, you will face the dark and survive. Now the story eases, the pace softening, the imagery dimming like embers fading after a long vigil. You are no longer in a cabin, no longer surrounded by the restless sounds of winter's grasp. Instead, imagine the hush of snowfall outside your own window, steady and quiet, blanketing the world in calm. The harshness of prairie nights drifts away, leaving only the gentle rhythm of breath, the warmth of blankets, and the soft glow of memory. Think of those who came before, families wrapped together beneath hides, children drifting to dreams to the sound of crackling fires, weary parents watching embers as though they were stars fallen into the hearth. Their struggles are long past, their nights endured, their mornings risen. What lingers is not the ache of cold, but the resilience, the small victories of survival repeated one night at a time. Allow yourself to carry only the gentlest parts forward, the hush of snow as lullaby, the flicker of light as comfort, the closeness of others as warmth. You don't have to feel the sting of frost or the scratch of straw tonight. Only the quiet comfort of knowing that even in the cruelest corners of the world, sleep always found a way. It came softly, like a mercy, folding the weary into its patient arms. So breathe deep, let your body grow heavy, safe, and still beneath the weight of your own warmth. The night stretches long, but it bears no teeth, only the gentle promise of rest. Close your eyes. Let the murmurs of the past guide you into calm. As you drift, remember, you are held by the same warmth, the same silence, the same tender need that once kept them human. Now sleep, deeply, quietly, completely. Sweet dreams. Thank you so much for watching. See y'all in the next one video. If you like my channel, like and subscribe.